Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So, with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Today's letter comes from Mark, and Mark has titled this letter as a sudden avoidant rupture. So I think we've already got a gist as to where this is going. So let's start. They write, Dear Dr. Ken, thank you for offering your letter reading service. I've been following your work for some time, and what you describe about avoidant shutdowns and blindsides is exactly what I've been living through. Below is my letter for your review. Firstly, thank you very much for the kind words. Just to reassure everyone, I am not a doctor. I do not have my PhD in anything. I appreciate the fact that people might believe I actually am a certified doctor. I mean, I'll take that compliment. But just so we're all on the same page, don't have that qualification, so please don't prescribe that one to me. But hey, for this, I'm happy to be Dr. Ken Reed for today. So the doctor's in the house. Let's assess what your situation is. I started dating Siri in January 2025. From the beginning, our relationship was deep, fast, and intimate. She told me, I love you, many times without hesitation, and told friends that I was the quote unquote the man she asked the universe for. We traveled to Kauai. Jesus, I'm so bad with Hawaiian names. Kauai, 4 times last winter for surfing, and those trips were some of the deepest moments I've ever had with anyone. And I know she'd agree they were special for her as well. Even on Valentine's Day, while we were on Kauai, I'm going to butcher that. I apologize. I'm sorry to anyone here who's living in Hawaii or native Hawaiian. I am just not going to pronounce that correctly. Kauai. I lightly brought up the subject of us being exclusive. She immediately and confidently agreed, which is the opposite of avoidance. Yes, it is actually. For a bit of clarity, not all avoidants are going to say no to exclusivity. A lot do, because that's something that they're not really looking for. We've heard many, many times. But just as a reminder, we don't need to have a full 10 out of 10 to cry out avoidant bingo. We just need a few. And also, it's important to understand too that when we think of what's going on here, it doesn't mean that the avoidant attachment activation has begun just yet. So, so far it's Green Flag City. Great time on Kauai. Amazing holidays, getting the I love yous, you're the man that the universe has sent me, etc. Good sounding stuff here, right? So, nothing to really raise a red flag about just yet. Siri committed without hesitation to me. She pulled me fully into her life, cooked for me, ran errands, always kept my wine glass full at her house, kept a robe for me at her house, and even let me ride her horse, which I later learned she'd never let partners do. Well, that's all sounding fantastic. One thing I will notice, very active service, isn't it? For those of you who may not have heard this point from me, I find a lot of avoidant attachers big on the acts of service. I don't love using the love languages to describe a lot of stuff, but hey, it has its use every now and then. Um, Also, the sex was amazing too. She was constantly making sure that I had food in me and was never hangry. Pause. This is interesting. So, Mark, what I want to point out to you is all of this is sounding on paper like tick, tick, tick. Yep, great, amazing. Love that for both of you. But there is one thing I'm noticing, which is the amount of work she's doing for you. Not to say you don't deserve it, but I almost feel like you've illustrated beautifully that she gives so much of herself to people. And it makes me wonder how she was raised, what love means for her, and why might that be a problem? Because I'm sensing that she's giving 110% and she cannot sustain it. All these gestures she's doing for you, feeding you to make sure you're never hungry, like that's a very specific point you've chosen to put in here, right? Like, it's one thing for partners to say, we had amazing dinners together. My partner cooked for me, full stop. But the fact that you went so far as to add that bit makes me think she's really going above and beyond to the point where it almost feels a little bit caretaker-ish. Dare I even say outright caretaker-ish? Why might that be a problem? Well, I haven't read the letter fully, but we know that people who've come from enmeshed backgrounds, if they've adopted the caretaker role, tend to project their dynamic with their parents onto the partner. That includes thinking, well, that love is just caretaking, even if you've never asked for that. And you might be enjoying all of this behavior and being like, this is amazing. But I guarantee you might cop a, I can't give you what you're looking for, or you're too much, you're too needy, whatever it is, even if you haven't done anything to deserve that. So I'm not saying that will happen, but I am saying I have seen and heard it happen. So there is that. She really showed her love primarily through acts of service. See, what did I say? Back on Oahu, I know how to pronounce that one, we cocooned at home, surfed together, and did ordinary errands and activities. I was always mindful too of her need for space and always gave it to her when she needed it, or even before she needed it. Okay, so you're very attentive. She made sure I felt like a king in her world, and I matched that. I detailed her car, paid to have her house cleaned, filled her gas tank, brought flowers, and constantly showed up as a good partner. I truly was a good boyfriend. I don't doubt you were a good boyfriend. But I have a funny feeling that will not be the basis for why this breaks up. Um, I think, Mark, that for you, something tells, I mean, look, from what it's sounding like, it sounds like both of you are very big on the acts of service department, which is lovely. But like I said, I am expecting certain shifts to come out from Siri. Let's continue. Around 2 months in, however, oh God, this has only been 2 months. So you've already had a lot of stuff going on in 2 months. I would definitely define this as love bombing. Around 2 months in, however, I began noticing some strange behavior. A close friend of mine suggested it looked like attachment-related issues. Ooh, that's an interesting point. Meaning that, like, if a friend was able to recognize that, they've obviously got a bit of an understanding of attachment issues. That's amazing. You have a friend who's aware of these things. But it does make me wonder, I wonder what you had shared with your friend for them to point out this seems like attachment issues. So, this led you to read a book on the subject. When I brought this up, Siri openly admitted that she struggles with avoidant behavior and acknowledged it has been a major problem for her throughout her life. Oh, great. So we're getting this 2 months in. She didn't deny it. Like when I went to her OBGYN appointments, my reason wasn't to see more vaginas, but to show her support as a good boyfriend. She'd never had surgery in her life before, whereas I've had many, and I felt a strong need to be there for her as an advocate and source of reassurance. Pause. Mark, this is just an observation about you, and I just want to point it out, and you can tell me later down the line if you think I'm being, too critical or I'm just off the mark. You sound highly attentive. Like you sound like you're very, very conscientious, and I'm wondering if you found at times you slip into overgiving and under receiving in certain relationships. Because I totally understand you obviously want to be there to support your partner, but you're making such a point of it that it makes me wonder, hmm, have you felt like you've had to, in your life, do constant good for others in order for them to see your worth? Because for you to list specifically, I went to my partner's OBGYN appointments to, show what a good boyfriend I am. My brain thinks like there might be a thought for you where doing certain actions equals I am a good boyfriend. And on one hand, absolutely. Being there for your partner through health related issues, absolutely fantastic. I'm all particularly for health related things. But just have to point at that out, that seems to be a potential thing. And, I could imagine if this goes the way I expect it to, you might have felt deep, 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 you know, not only betrayal, but also pain at feeling like I've done all this. Why wasn't I good enough for you, for Siri? I could be wrong. You could call me out and say, no, Ken, I don't agree with your assessment of that, and that's totally fine. But, that's something I'm just reading here. Okay, so we found out that she's obviously never had surgery before. You've had a lot. That's also something big too. You don't have to detail this to me privately, but like you obviously had a lot of health issues. So you're no stranger to that gamut. So much fun. I've been through the health, shit show before, so I know what it's like. Anyways, and I felt a strong need to be there for her as an advocate and source of reassurance. Fair enough. Siri is very aware of her avoidance and she's not proud of it. I will say I was proud of her and the vast majority of the efforts she tried to put into the relationship to meet my needs whilst not triggering herself. Yeah, but she's overcompensating. That's the problem. Is you look at a lot of this stuff and think, oh, she's, going to a lot of effort to make sure she doesn't activate herself. The problem is she's doing that to repress her avoidancy. So, in a psychodynamic sense, she's going at 110% to try and suppress that avoidancy, which has caused ruckus in her previous relationships, but it's still going to come out either way. When we have inner conflict, if we try and push something down, it's always going to be, almost without fail, the thing that bites us in the ass in the end. So that's why, to me, I understand why you think she's, doing a good job of this, but I look at this and go, actually, she's not addressing it. She's going to every effort to try and push that stuff down. In some ways, she seems like a very typical dismissive avoidant, but in a lot of other ways, she seems more disorganized and unique, as in fearful avoidant. The girl truly lives with something awful and she knows it, and nothing seems to work for her. Okay. In March 2025, I accompanied her to one of her OB/GYN appointments. Both of these visits were for routine, non-pregnancy related procedures. Oh, sorry. I just want to point out, um, I appreciate, by the way, Mark, that you've mentioned you're not showing up because you're necessarily trying to, you know, be into other women who you see in those appointments. I get that aspect, but I just wanted to point out if that was what you meant by I'm not looking to see other vaginas in that context, I get it. But again, I almost wonder if you feel like, you have to constantly hit the I'm a good boyfriend checklist when you're dating someone you're into. Because let me put it like this, and the reason why I bring this up. When I think of when I think of secure behavior, now my view on this could be very different from everyone else. Showing off your partner in certain aspects of life, including health, absolutely fine. But, it's one of those things where we just do it if we feel called to it, and obviously to support our partner through it. If they decline a like they don't have to show up, fine, we don't have to show up. But it's not because we're, trying to mentally hit those boxes, so to speak. And that's why I'm just noticing this and thinking, I think, you know, if that is something that is, perhaps in the back of your mind where you're like, I need to do this in order to prove myself, I need to show myself, because why wouldn't a good boyfriend do this? I think that's maybe coming more from the, I don't want to be a bad, boy, son, man fear than a genuine care. I mean, it can be mixed in with a genuine care. I'm not saying it's not genuine, but I think sometimes those things get blended. Love, desire, and a bit of fear as well. They tend to go hand in hand in some cases, but yeah. I thought it'd be a good idea to be there for her, both as someone familiar with the process and simply wanting to show love and support. I can't imagine any woman not wanting her husband or boyfriend to come along to appointments like these as a gesture of care. Yes, but this goes back to my point that I said earlier. some women don't necessarily need their husbands to be around for that too. Like some people, like for example, if it's a blood test, if it's something, I know that's minor, but like if it's a surgery situation, sure, they might absolutely want you to be there for them, especially aftercare. Totally get that. But this is where it's best not to get into our heads thinking, surely, my partner as a woman would absolutely want her man to be there. No, not necessarily. So even like sometimes people, again, if they're secure, they may genuinely be like, absolutely would love you to be there to support me. That would mean the world to me. Others might just be like, you know what, I think I'll be okay. I'll handle it. I've got, plans to get myself home, depending on what the nature of the operation is. Like, for example, some colonoscopies here in Australia, they do say have someone to take you home. But in other cases, if you're going for routine sort of stuff and you can handle it, they might be like, I'm all good, I can handle it. So I sort of see this as being a case less of, my point simply is to say is don't allow yourself to think that every person is going to necessarily, be gushing to have a person be there for any and all appointments like this, because a lot of people will. Some others will be just like, I'm all good, I can handle it. So just pointing that out. Um, and of course, if she hadn't wanted me to be there, sorry, English. And of course, if she hadn't wanted to be far out. And of course, if she hadn't wanted me to be there, she could have told me so. Correct. Now that I agree with 1 billion% feeds into my point from earlier. After that appointment, she told me she was glad I came, that it felt all right to have me with her, and that experience seemed to build trust. Okay, ticks all around. So in that case, I think yes, Mark, I think fantastic that you showed up, and it's great that she obviously validated your support. So I see no reason why that's a problem. But again, just pointing that out because that is a thing that I see in a lot of people in this space. Then came April 23rd of 2025. Okay, so we're a few months down the line. The rupture day. Oh God. That morning, she had another OB/GYN appointment. I went with her again, took her to lunch afterward, and filled her tank with gas like I always did each week. On the car ride home, she broke down crying and said through tears, I'm not used to someone being so generous with me. I'm tired of being in survival mode. And it was one of the most vulnerable moments I'd ever experienced with her. I didn't try to fix it. I just reassured her, it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out. Then she dropped me off at home. Yeah, that's fascinating. It sounds to me like for her, on one hand, she's saying, I'm exhausted being in survival mode, but I wouldn't be surprised if there might be a great resistance to letting her walls down and be with someone like yourself. Because, Mark, if you've been in survival mode that long, and everyone's version of survival mode feels a bit different, but, that's a huge identity shift, right? Going from a state that you've known your entire life to then being able to welcome, a man's love in this context like this, I reckon it would be very hard for her to make that shift. So, that's why I'd say I think that it's important to understand that, for her, this might feel almost a bit like an identity crisis. And I could imagine, by the way, what you was doing in your reassurance, tick, fine. I think you're being very supportive and loving for her. Later that same day, after she dropped me off, I asked her for a hug, a simple gesture of affection. Later that evening, I happened to be in this area near her house and I called to ask if it would be all right if I came for a hug because I was feeling a little raw from the day. Looking back on this moment, I think she was already in a triggered state before the call started. And rather than responding with warmth, she immediately melted down on me and went into a full shutdown, more like an emotional evacuation. Feeling confused and hurt, I reached out to one of her close friends, someone who had at times served as an intermediary between us during previous rupture events. Okay, so this isn't the first time this has happened. Wow. Okay, wow. So this has obviously been a pattern. And I texted her that I was done because I didn't believe Siri had melted down on me over something as small as asking for a hug. Oh, yeah, she probably had. That friend ended up showing my message to Siri, and I believe it may have triggered Siri's deep abandonment wound. So instead of repair, Siri flipped the script. Rather than me dumping her, which was never my intent, I was just speaking out of raw emotion in the moment. Yeah, I get it. I know what you mean. She went ahead and dumped me outright. Yep, that would be right. I think I touched her abandonment wound on top of her already being in a triggered state and needing space. And she did it through a text message of all things. After all the love, intimacy, and care we had shared, it felt totally heartless. The same day she admitted how much my generosity meant to her, she ended the relationship, To me, it felt like an emotional evacuation, not a considered breakup, and I was blindsided. Mark, you have every right to have felt blindsided. You probably still do. Like, that's terrible. I'm so sorry that that happened. I could imagine that after the appointment, when she's telling you, I'm so sick of being in survival mode, I think the conversation, she wasn't actually having that with you. I think she was having it with herself. And what I mean by that is, I think that she was probably trying to fight her avoidance, and the avoidance, that shadowy aspect of her, was winning. I think it's no surprise that after being so loving for her, so attentive and warm and generous, a part of her that felt unworthy of this completely took control. And she had what did you describe it as? A blip or I know you describe it as an emotional evacuation, but you used a term to describe what she did, rupture. When she's obviously had multiple ruptures, and I'm not surprised because sometimes I find with avoidant attachers who are on the severe end, um, when they feel real love for someone, like someone's being very loving of them, it can feel so shame invoking because they're not ready for it and they often feel so unworthy of what they're receiving. Doesn't happen in all cases. There are some other things that will often show up. The point is that, I wouldn't be surprised if she felt so unworthy to be with you. And when the mutual friend showed her the text exchange, I imagine she was probably fighting some ROCD. So typically with relationship obsessive compulsive disorder, some of the intrusive thoughts include, I'm no good for this person. They can do so much better than me. I'm only going to hold them back. I'm terrible if I'm with this person. I'm really screwing them up, blah, blah, blah. And so they can unfortunately act out on those beliefs by rejecting a partner. And I think with Siri, I wouldn't be surprised if she knee-jerk reacted. She blew up the relationship out of fear, which is what you've suggested, of being rejected herself. And listen, Mark, I don't blame you for saying to her, out loud, I can't handle this anymore. This is ridiculous. Because you're right, asking for a hug, a gesture of warmth, and that evoke, and I mean, I know before I said that was probably the reason for the shutdown. I'm going to take that back. I think it was probably just the full, like just the day's events. I think her having, received so much attentiveness, care, and love from you throughout the day and also systemically throughout the relationship, I think caused her to probably shut down over time. The hug request may have added fuel to the fire, but I can understand your frustration because on the surface, you're just asking for a brush of connection, and then you're not able to, feel that reciprocated. So on that note, I'd just say totally get it, and I totally respect the frustration you feel, and also I can imagine how, hurtful, heartbreaking, and awful it would have been to have this sent to you in a text message, which is ridiculous. Like, when we think about it, this is, you shouldn't be receiving this in a text message. If there are real issues in a relationship, at least, especially one with as much intensity as this, where you've been helping her with her OBGYN appointments, even though you've only been going out for 4 months, you've been doing a lot of intense, intimate stuff together. So in that aspect, I'd say it's just, it's just not okay for her to be doing what she's doing, is all I want to say. All right, let's continue. After the rupture, she went silent. I gave her a couple of weeks of no contact, though she did leave flowers on my doorstep for my 40th birthday. Happy birthday, by the way, with her handwritten note. When she still refused to speak with me, I lightly reached out to a few of her close friends who had mediated during past struggles, hoping for repair or closure. I also sent her flowers twice and left two handwritten notes while returning her belongings. Despite these good faith gestures, she accused me of quote unquote stalking her. How are you stalking her? You know, she's given you flowers and a note and you've reciprocated. That is not stalking. God, sometimes avoidance when they do this, it's ridiculous. Um, she accused me of stalking her, of driving by her home and showing up at her work, none of which happened. Of course not. She's just catastrophizing. And I deliberately avoided her house, knowing she often made other similar accusations during ruptures. Okay, so this isn't the first time she's done this. Okay, so I'm going to be very blunt and say this is a pattern. And clearly, she's someone that when she gets activated, she starts catastrophizing and making out like you're some predator and aggressor, which you're not. And I just want to say, I believe you will, but like, Mark, I could imagine, you know, a lot of people who experience, an event with someone like Siri, that's seared into their nervous system. They usually don't forget this, meaning that if you're ever dating someone else out there or with friends with people like this or recognize it in your parents, I can promise you, you'll often see this much quicker next time. But I appreciate given the fact that, this has happened in April, right? And we're now early September. You're only about 5 months out, if my maths is correct. This would be very raw for you. I could imagine you're probably not even thinking about dating again right now. And all I want to say is, I am very sorry that you've gone through this because it still sounds like you're in that impact crater, so to speak, of the emotional fallout of what's happened. The emotional evacuation, as you call it. I would also just call it, emotional nuclear blast. It's pretty awful to go through. And you're now being called a stalker, which you're not. You mean actually, one thing I'll give you credit for is you're very deliberate with what you do. Anyways, in late May, she happened to see me in public with another woman. The very next day, she filed for a temporary What? She filed for a temporary restraining order against you. There was no violence, no threats or harassment from my end of any kind. The court denied her request outright, with the judge even remarking that nothing I had done rose to that level and sealing the records. Still, the experience of being legally reframed as a threat by the woman who had just said she loved me was terrifying and traumatic. That is terrifying and traumatic. Holy shit. I've heard of a similar experience that happened with a guy who had a similar experience with another guy. Um, but I suspect if I had to mentally, pull the pieces of what happened there, I've seen this happen with some avoidant attachers where on the severe end, and this is more the fearful avoidant territory, some dismissers will do this too, is they'll catastrophize, they'll be paranoid, they'll project their paranoia onto you, making it seem like you're needy and, too much and everything. And I've seen some of these individuals take their exes to court when they were the ones who discarded my clients in the first place. And it's insanity. And, I think for her, what Siri must have done is suspect that any reminder of you, any gesture you showed her, you know, she has a part of her that's obviously paranoid that says, he's trying to, take away my space, he's harassing me. And she projects that onto you to make you seem like a stalker. And I suspect that part of her connects with her shame because any reminder of you just makes her feel unworthy and awful about herself. So what does she do? She throws it onto you. She doesn't want to deal with her unworthiness. She wants to make it seem about you. I suspect deep down she felt like a stalker for putting the flowers and the note on your doorstep and she didn't feel good about it. And then she's projected this onto you. So that's a little bit of 2 cents from me. But let's take a moment here to just say, I am fucking sorry that you've had this happen to you. What a joke. What an awful experience to go through. That's also, correct me if I'm wrong, on your public record now. You've had someone accuse you of stalking. What's really fascinating is throughout this letter, you have been very deliberate in showing, what a good person you are. And from a psychodynamic perspective, it makes me think how awful for you to have done all of these things to be good and reasonable, only for you to be mischaracterized and defamed as being a stalker and someone who's, got ill intent towards women, particularly against someone who's actually been the perpetrator of a lot of violence to you. So yeah, there's probably some stuff there, that you should absolutely speak to a therapist about in your own time. But I've seen and heard this stuff happening before to a lot of people. And interestingly enough, it does seem to happen to the people who, you know, really put in a lot of effort to be a good person, towards others, that they end up getting, really badly done by and treated by people like this. I'm not saying every avoidant's going to, call you a threat or say you're a stalker, but oh my God, the number of men and women I've worked with where this has happened, it's just insanity. Anyways, let's keep moving on. After the dust had settled on the court decision, I briefly had an encounter with her at the beach where she admitted to me that the reason she filed the restraining order was to ruin my reputation. Oh, great. That was deeply perplexing to me, and I can only interpret it as her protector speaking rather than her true self. Yes, correct. You are absolutely right. It was a protector. So you clearly understand internal family systems language. So, yes, I suspect that it was a paranoid protector because anything in my world that, I mean, I could be wrong. There's probably a more advanced IFS practitioner listening to this. You know, anytime I hear of something that operates from the brain space, I'm like, oh yeah, what's that protector part saying today? And I kind of have a little bit, I mean, look, those protector parts, my God, you've got to be very good with them because they can treat us terribly. And they can do a lot of damage as well too if they're not in alignment. Um, but I want to just throw in there and say her level of dysregulation is quite bad. And it does strike me as thinking, does she have some other personality stuff going on there too? She may not. She may not be anyone with any personality issues, but for her to do that, for her to want to ruin your reputation, you know, that to me is a pretty searing and damning thing to admit. I mean, on the one hand, great for the honesty, but that's pretty fucked up if you think about it. Like that's, you know, she's made it very clear what she's wanted to do to you. So yeah, not great. What she effectively did, rather than admit that she lost control and had a shutdown on the day of the OBGYN appointment, was double down on her narrative to protect her public image. Yeah, funny that. In doing so, she attempted to erase me, erase the relationship, and cast me as the villain. Yeah, because she didn't want to feel like the villain herself. Now I know that there are two sides to every story, but I also work in the legal profession with my INFJ personality type, and clarity is my curse. I even documented all of these incidences. They were happening, so partly so I could recall them later with accuracy. I think that's a fabulous thing to do, by the way. Big fan of journaling, big fan of documenting this stuff, because believe me, sometimes you need to fall back on this just in case you have doubt, and doubt is the bane of all of this. So, no, I'm all for what you're doing. And I'm glad you're also in a legal profession in the context that, people who don't have that in like that knowledge on their side often can be blindsided by this and it can feel very, scary and also make you feel quite powerless. So I'm glad that you've actually, you're in this field. And you also seem to be no stranger to therapy talk as well, too, which is great. I wanted to be able to provide a clear record to a therapist. Good. Can I just tell you based on this, your I don't think based on this record, and I mean, of course, we understand that letter writers are biased and they're going to probably present themselves as well as they can. But usually, in my experience, most of the letter writers who write in are pretty clear if they've done something wrong. Like, I've had some letter writers talk about how they're having affairs. I've had letter writers talk about the things they've done where they're like, I should have done X, Y, Z differently. Correct, they should have. But Mark, I've got to be honest, you haven't really done much to me, which has made me think you're a predator or there's something wrong that you've done. My one piece of wisdom to you would be, please never make, the mistake of letting someone's ruptures, continue without, boundaries and pause because you don't want that to happen to you again. And the other thing too is, I think, a conversation with a therapist, particularly on what this experience has meant for you and how it's made you feel, how it links to you, wanting to be a good person and a good boyfriend and a good, partner and all that. That's something worth looking into for sure, if it's appropriate. But putting all that to one side, that whole thing of there's two sides to every story, I hate that whole thing. Like, I think it's sort of a hand wavy gesture to that actually at times, even though it's supposed to create critical thinking, I think actually at times denies it because instead of holding empathy and understanding for like what's going on in a situation which is outright abusive, you have suffered abuse here. It just tends to be a case of, well, what was Siri thinking and feeling? I think who fucking cares at this stage? She's done more damage and harm than good. And I just think, nah. I understand she may be going through a lot, and I understand that she might need some help, but hey, she's not the one who's written this letter in. And if she was the one writing this in an act of contrition, I'd be like, whoa, good on you for the humility. However, she hasn't. Anyways, what she effectively did, yep, you've read that. Since the court decision, I've run into her about 3 or 4 times in public, and each time I've noticed she cannot make eye contact with me. I believe this is an avoidant feature. You bet it is. A form of shutdown rather than indifference. Yeah, what it is, it's a part of her trying to keep you out of mind, out of sight, because it's too painful for her. I've run into about three or four. Oh, wait, I've read that, sorry. If it was true indifference, I think she would be able to look me in the eyes, but she simply cannot. I've also noticed that she looks visually older, as if she's aged 5 years in just a few months. Yep, that happens. A lot of these like I've bumped into exes where they look haggard after these experiences, avoidant exes, and it's usually because the stress has eaten them alive. And with each run in, especially while surfing, she's physically positioned herself a little closer to me in proximity. Oh, how funny that is. It's funny how the psyche works, how we try and reject something, yet we physically find ourselves drawn to it. And that magnetism that avoidants often find themselves in when that happens, it's fascinating, isn't it? While she still avoids direct eye contact, I've also noticed that when I catch waves, I can feel her eyes on me, and I've seen her watching me. When I see her surfing, I make no contact and say no words to her. Good on you. And you're right, this is not it's not true indifference. I've been working very hard in therapy, going 1 to 2 days a week. Jesus, that's a lot. To address the trauma I've been through as a result of this and to work on my own attachment style. Good on you. It has been the most disorientating experience of my life romantically. Yeah, I bet it has. I wouldn't be surprised if it's been the most disorientating experience, period. At the same time, I've been intensively focused on my physical health. I've lost 45 pounds and I'm getting into the best shape of my life in preparation for the winter surfing session. Oh, sorry, surfing season. I'm jelly because I also surf. Admittedly, probably nowhere near as much as you, but hey, I'm all for fitness and surfing. But despite the progress, I'm not sleeping well at night. I'm tortured by a carousel of emotions, great term, by the way, and intrusive visuals connected to her. The grief and longing for missing her is unfathomable. Ultimately, I really loved her and she really loved me. And I believe that if she had just told me how she was feeling on that day, all of this could have been avoided. But it felt like she got hijacked before she even had the chance. She was already gone, for lack of a better word. Yes, I agree with a lot of that. Let me make an observation. I think you're still in love with her, and that's totally okay. Part of the reason why I said, you're only 5 months out of this emotional bomb that's gone off is because I don't think I've met someone yet who's fully detached and become indifferent within 5 months. In fact, if that happens, it's a bit weird. Um, to me, I think that you're understandably protecting your heart and you're also probably still holding a candle for her, and that is so fine. Let's put her violence against you to one side for a minute. She was at one point showing up for you, amazing. You had excellent holidays together in Hawaii. And I imagine that, between the meals that you shared, the preparation she was giving to make sure you weren't hangry, that she really showed up in ways that made you feel connected more than probably any other girl that you've been with. And I can understand that this has probably just blown you backwards. And so, whenever I hear someone having dreams and nightmares about this and the emotions are coming up, particularly at night or early morning, it's unfinished business. It's unresolved. And that's so okay. Like, truly, it's so normal to go through this. So, I am really sorry that you've gone through this experience because it's not fair. It's horrible. And it does sound to me like you're still in the thick of the shit. So, I get it. Believe me, it took me months, to really get my head out of it. And it sounds like both of you, even though you are apart, still haven't really, fully resolved this. I imagine you're resolving it by going to therapy and even writing this out. And I hope that my words to you on this have given you a measure of validation for what you've been through. But I could also imagine that, there's still some work to go. But yeah, no, this is very classic sort of stuff. Since the court date on July the 1st, I've been in strict no contact. While common sense I would say to stay away from her, it isn't that simple when you love someone and know they loved you too. Absolutely. In fact, I'd say common sense can get fucked in these contexts. Also, not easy in a small town like the North Shore of Oahu. Before the rupture, yeah, actually, I can agree with that. As someone who's been to Hawaii, that is not a big city by any stretch. Before the rupture, I'd made it clear, and she knew that my goal was to provide her with financial assistance so she could focus entirely on her healing while I took care of everything else. She doesn't make much money, while I do well for myself, and I understood how hard it would be for someone avoidant to accept that kind of help, but I was willing. In other words, if she took care of what was in the mirror, I would take care of the world. If only it's that easy. You know, when I said in the previous paragraph that I partially agree with you, it's because it sounds to me like she wasn't able to really meet her shadow of her avoidance and really come to integrate that. What does that mean in less psychobabble? It basically means she was not able to overcome her fear of not being good enough. She was not able to overcome whatever trauma and history had led her to where she was on that fateful day where she, you know, pulled away and saw your message and, did what happened, where she decided to end the relationship over a text. That knee-jerk impulsive, childish reaction. She was trying to suppress that for quite some time, but it got the better of her. And I want to make it clear, when I say it got the better of her, I don't want to make it seem like this dark side of her that she had no agency over just stole the show. Partially true, but she's also responsible for her healing. And from the sounds of it, she didn't, she's not ready for this at all. And she's actually a danger in dating. Like to have done what she's done to you, dangerous, not okay. Now, I can see you've left me some questions, so let's get into it. So, Dr. Ken, love that. Maybe one day I will do my PhD. I'll be honest, I don't even know my doctorate, sorry. I don't even know what questions to be asking. At the heart of it, I just want to have her back, or at the very least, I want the chance to observe her in person before reconnecting in a deeper conversation so I can determine whether she's really ready and willing to do the work. Aw. I really feel for you there. And can I just say thank you for your honesty with that? So many people judge others for wanting their avoidant ex back, but it's the pathway to healing is to acknowledge that you still want them back because the heart does what the heart wants. And usually, interestingly enough, it's usually when we just allow, ourselves to acknowledge that and just for things to play out that usually things go usually in one direction, which is figuring out more about whether or not this is right for you or not. I have full faith in you, Mark, that, there might be a point in time where you both have another run-in with each other and you're able to, have some degree of, let's call it unpacking of stuff. Maybe it won't. Maybe you'll have to have that energy out in therapy. And this is not me blowing smoke up your ass saying, oh, don't worry, she's the one, you're going to make it work. Let me be very direct on that. She's got years ahead of her before she'd be ready to, to properly be in relationship with someone like you. She need to tone down the acts of service, that's for sure. But I think that, I can say that because I've got the awareness and the knowledge and the experience to understand this. You might feel differently. You might feel like she's a one in a million girl. And, to you, you need to go through those steps to figure that out for yourself. Anyways, toward the end, I was also actively learning how to communicate with her better and how to approach her avoidance without triggering it. You're never going to do that, so just stop. I'm only being blunt there because with someone like Siri, it's not about how you communicate with her. It's the fact that when she's activated, game over. No amount of non-violent communication, learning from Thais Gibson how to speak with an avoidant is going to work in this context. Why? Because she's not just avoidantly attached. She has big arrested development, lots of character trauma. She's more than someone with just an avoidant attachment style. That's why you got to be very careful of that. You can give it a go. By all means, try. It's good to try, but that's not going to be the thing that saves it. If it does, I'll be shocked out of my mind, but it probably won't be. And I can't help but feel that if we had had a little more time, things might have been different. Well, I'm going to just say I don't know if I agree with that based on all the experiences and things I've seen. But again, you may feel like this is unfinished business literally between the two of you, in which case, you know, when the time is right, I will be, I wouldn't be surprised if the universe wills it so that you're able to see what you can make of this. But in my experience, I'm going to say I think that was mostly it. Because I've gone through this more times than I care to count, and usually that is it. Anyways, at the same time, I know how unlikely it is for an avoidant to change and how hopeless the situation may be in reality. It's not that avoidants are unlikely to change, it just depends on the avoidant. Their character often, and willingness to work on themselves are the things that will get them through a lot of this. But I don't think Siri's got it. Not by a long shot. As I write this, I'm aware my anxious attachment brain is probably reaching for anything it can hold on to get her back. It's fine. Like, I know a lot of people might throw shade at me for saying that, but it's just, it happens. Like, she was your girl, probably still feels like your girl, and that's okay. Like, seriously, no shame to that part of you that wants her back again. Like, the number of people who want their exes back, I get it. There's a whole business out there of crooked coaches who try and facilitate that. And I can understand the yearning and the longing for it too. Took me a long time to get to the point where I could go, yeah, no thanks. So I'm not saying you will ever get there. I'm not saying you even want to get there. That's not the point. The point is so valid off the back of what you've been through because she sounds like has lit up your world. That's part of the loop I've been trapped in. Get it? So my real question to you is, what should I do? What is the wisest course of action here? Because despite everything, I want to give this one more go. Oh, you are asking me the forbidden question, aren't you? All right. Well, if you want the genie in the bottle answer, I'm prepared to give it to you, but do with this what you will. Okay, so ethical disclaimer. I am not a get your ex back coach. I am not someone who advises you ever work to get an avoidant back, but on occasion I work with some clients who feel like they still have some psychological stuff they need to work out with their avoidant ex. So let me be very clear as a massive disclaimer. This person has not changed, is unlikely to change, is unlikely to be your twin flame and soulmate that goes off with you on a highway to heaven. I'm just being real. I've seen so many of these cases. Like it is the way it is. For her to have pulled that stunt on you, to have wanted to ruin your reputation, it's not just attachment issues you're working with. There's so much more to it than this. And maybe you don't quite see the extent of what you're dealing with. So without trying to sound like Oogie Boogie from The Nightmare Before Christmas and saying you can't comprehend the situation that you're in, it's hopeless, it's finished, you haven't got a prayer. All I want to say is that, you know, be like I'm being realistic with you and saying I don't think this is going to work out in a honeymoon-esque situation. But you got to figure that out for yourself. And this is part of your journey. So, leaving a fraction, 5%, I'm just going to make it 1%, leaving you 1% possibility of growth and change, because we can never rule these out and say they're universally like this, although usually I think they are. Let me give you now my 2 cents to you. If it were me, I would focus on not trying to control the outcome for how you're going to get, Siri back. I would be honest with your desire that you want her back. I would talk about it in therapy with also in the hope that your therapist is just non-judgmental and just listens to you and allows you to play out your feelings and just to feel it through. I think it's really important for you to be open to the possibility of it happening without trying to conspire to make it happen. And I think the biggest thing for you is to try and let go of control of it ever happening. I know for so many of my clients, they've often just allowed themselves to get on with life, to acknowledge their love for their partner, to feel it, because you're still in a period of loving her. And you can't just repress and suppress that. God knows, I've watched many of my clients try and it's backfired on them. So the thing to do here is just to be present with your emotions. And I guarantee if you're present with your emotions, you just sit with them and allow yourself to feel them and you journal on it, write about it, you do voice messages to yourself about it, unpack that in therapy and you really just allow yourself just to have the space to imagine what that experience could be like. That's fine. You know, energetically, you're not trying to like cling on to this experience. You're actually just allowing it to do its thing and release from your system. And as you're releasing this and you're also not having as much control over this, I wouldn't be surprised. I can't guarantee that she'll do this because not every avoidant does this, that you get an interaction with her randomly where she acknowledges and says, she might bump into you, she might have an interaction with you of a sort, she might have something happen, but you really need to just sit with the fact that you still love her. And do not try and repress that. Do not try and get rid of that because that is the worst thing you can do. It's really important for you with radical, understanding of the situation to just feel your love for this person. So yeah, that's my 2 cents to you. If anyone else here thinks that I'm enabling these dynamics, you would be mistaken. I often find this is the pathway out of this sometimes for a lot of people. It was for me. It's not for everyone, but I guarantee you'll probably have a few more run-ins, probably at the beach as you're surfing. And then one day, I guarantee she'll probably come up to you. She might say something innocuous like, "Hey, do you know where the bathroom is?" Even if, it's like right beside her. She might even come to you and say, "Hey, I don't even remember what we were arguing about. Like, why did I fight that? Like, clearly I really, I wanted to see you again and I felt so weird about what happened. I felt so bad for you." She will probably say something which feels a bit reality bending, but I guarantee, yeah, she'll probably, you'll probably have something at least, that might happen. So yeah, Mark, thank you for what has been a very relatable letter, admittedly with a very big plot twist of you getting accused of stalking. That's pretty massive. And I'm sorry that this has happened to you because that's a terrible thing to have happen to anyone when it's not earned and deserved. Anyways, much thanks to you for submitting this letter, and I hope that it's given you a measure of validation off the back of what you've been through.